the big things we were just kind of talking about before previously, and we've alluded to here and there. But if any of you are playing Magic and are not as lucky to just have someone dump an entire collection on you, or
Hmm.
being able to play with your friends' cards, you understand that this can be expensive. Just as a game in general, it can be expensive, especially
Hmm.
when you have commander decks going for like $90 retail right now.
Yep.
But that's just the cards, right?
Hmm.
There's so much more that goes into Magic than that. And if anyone here has ever looked at any of Nate's other videos, you'd understand that there's a lot of other products too.
Oh yeah, it can get super overwhelming. It's interesting to me to see how they've tried to handle this over the years, because Wizards is I almost, this is going to sound weird, but I almost feel bad for them in some ways, because they're a little bit caught in this catch 22. Whenever they put out a starter product, it's the community almost universally rejects it because it's a starter product. I don't need a starter product. I know how to play, and it's got crappy cards. Why would I ever buy that? So they're almost not incentivized to make products for beginners. Like they have the starter decks, and I think that that's a good thing that they were doing. I think though they should go back to the old way. Was it used to be you could walk into an LGS and say, "Hey, I'm interested in Magic. I don't have any cards. Where do I begin?" And if you had a good local game store that was connected to Wizards, and they had good folks there, they would pull out a starter deck of your favorite color. They had a couple options, and they'd hand it to you and say, "Here you go, free of charge. Go play." And they discontinued that about, I don't know, about 5 years ago. And I really wish they hadn't, because I think that was a great way to get beginners in, because it was free. First one's free, baby. You know?
I never even heard of that program.
Oh yeah, that program was for years. It was for a long time. In fact, you can find some old professor videos where he talks about it and how he praises it and says it's great, and then Wizards nuked it. And and I think part of the reason they nuked it is because it didn't happen very often. Like, people didn't come in very often to do it. But I still think, I think they should have kept with it, because now you have, Lord of the Rings fans coming in going, okay, well, I'll buy a starter deck if you could find any available, because there's cards in them that, people want to get. So collectors have been buying them up. Or their alternative to buy a full deck is a $90+ commander deck, or a $60+ commander deck. I think is a mistake. I think they should go back to the free deck program.
It doesn't even have to be that fully or necessarily. I mean, it's interesting with the arena half of the equation where you do get to at least keep the decks you did the tutorial with, and I think they usually give you another one for free, right?
Hmm.
And that doesn't cost them anything.
Yeah.
Like, and that's the part where, at least on the digital side, I think they need to be doing more of,
Hmm.
is give you that little bit of a drip to say, hey, here's something, come back, right? And I know they usually do, the login bonuses, and like that was a thing they've been doing on there too.
Hmm.
I don't log in enough to get them. The point is, at least that's a thing,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Moto doesn't have that at all.
Yeah.
Moto is dump your money into digital currency and buy cards from online retailers that aren't them, and then go
Hmm.
play your deck.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think there's another problem here while we're talking about these, is the fact that if you want to start playing, there's so many different ways to start that there's not a very consistent, hey, this is how you should go about it as a new player,
Yeah.
right? And the just finding the Magic the Gathering online Moto to play that
Hmm.
was not easy.
Yeah. I think if you asked Wizards what they want a new player, brand new person, doesn't know anything about Magic but is interested in getting started, how should they get into Magic? They're going to have two answers. The first answer is going to be Arena. Just go to Arena. Just download Arena, go through the Sparky, main thing. That's the way you should do it. And the other answer will be starter decks, like the ones they did for Lord of the Rings, the ones they had before that.
Right.
Those are going to be the answers. In my opinion, those are imperfect answers, because not everybody wants to do Arena. They want to play this as a card game. They don't want to download something on their phone or their tablet.
Right.
And the starter decks, you've got like, especially with the Lord of the Rings one, you have an availability problem. For the regular ones, the non Lord of the Rings ones, that's okay. I guess that's as good as you're going to get. But yeah, I think that's what Wizards would answer, is those two. And I don't think those are great answers.
And to be fair, that those tend to be the answers people give on Reddit as well, most
Hmm.
often.
Mhm.
And the arena's really good at helping you remember how to play the game.
Yeah.
But the downside there is it does too much for you, especially if you're a newbie and you need to learn why it does what it does.
Yeah.
Because the automation of not having to actually read your opponent's cards if you don't care to, not having to think about what's going on, right? Not
Mhm.
having to figure out what triggers you have on the board, as
Exactly.
we've
Yeah.
seen with any of our gameplay footage, that
Yeah.
sometimes we forget things. But no, it's I think that's where Arena lacks, right? But it
Mhm.
was good for me when I came back into the game because I just got to sit there, go through the tutorial, and go, yeah, that's how this works. It's this is the phase order, this
Mhm.
is that, and you start remembering things. It's not good at getting you a taste of the weird and the realistic Magic.
Yeah.
That's where I think moving on to like the other bit with the starter decks, you need a mentor. You need
Yeah.
at least one person, if not a couple, to help you learn how to play and like not just curb stomp you or noob stomp you or whatever
Mhm.
it is into oblivion and not make you want to play the game again.
Yeah.
Help you learn it a bit and then let you learn.
Yeah.
Really, you just play the Magic. Like I remember teaching someone and we did the hands out where you can like look at their hand and say, hey, okay, this is what the board state looks like. You have this, like, what are you thinking? What's a
Mhm.
good option? Like, do I have blockers? Can you get an attack through? Right? Like those kinds of conversations. Say, do you need a defender? Right?
Uh-huh.
Very basic Magic.
Yeah. There isn't a perfect solution, I think. Like I think actually the perfect solution is a friend who's been playing Magic for a really long time, has a massive collection, hands you a box of bulk and says, "Here, these are yours. Let's, here's a deck that I made. Let's play some games." And like I think that's the perfect solution, but not everybody has that, obviously.
Right.
There isn't a perfect solution to scale, I guess is what I should say.
But I think the fact when we were talking about too with like the cost of these decks and like even the game nights thing that they put out twice now, the bundle where it's the five different little decks
Uh huh.
that are supposed to be balanced and they aren't. Um, those that's a great way to do like a non super competitive
Yeah.
version with people who are semi familiar, but you can teach people with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's the same thing. Like I think the next step up from that, I would say, is like the jumpstart packs that they've been putting out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those are great to do. Grab two and you just make a deck, and you don't have any super understanding of like how to like ultimately play that deck in a meta. And it's like, okay, no, like I got dinosaurs and vampires. Okay, we're gonna do this, right?
Uh huh. Well, that's the thing. Like, I think Jumpstart is actually a fantastic way. That is probably to me the closest to a perfect solution as Magic can get. You've got two different types of barriers to entry. You've got the cost, which is what we've been mostly talking about, but there's another barrier, and this is like another example of a cheap way to get into Magic or to get started in Magic is Draft. Draft is a fantastic way to get into Magic. The problem with Draft is you have to know how to play the game, and then you've got a whole other layer of deck building, which is a whole other thing that you need to be somewhat aware of to even remotely do well in Draft. So that's the other barrier to entry. The other barrier to entry is the complication of the game. And
Right.
while Draft does well in the cost quadrant, or I guess half, it doesn't do well in the complicated side. Whereas Jumpstart, in my opinion, straddles that line almost perfectly because it's fairly cheap. You just buy 2 packs per person and then sleeve them up, smash them together, and go at it. I think it's an excellent solution.
Well, the big thing with the draft that like I run into a problem with, right, is it's not just the deck building, but there's the meta and everything else that goes into like, okay, what are people trying to build, and then that psychology of like what potentially is missing from this pack that got passed to me, right?
Yeah,
Like what
yeah.
colors am I seeing? What colors am I not? Right? Like there's a whole different play style, and that's I would honestly call draft like intermediate play if you want to even get middle of the pack,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
The with Jumpstart, it's different, and I think that plays into your whole Cubomagic thing too,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where as long as you know what cards came in what pack, you can build these little cube packs and
Mm-hmm.
host your own mini draft night where you guys randomly pick 2 packs out of the lot, and then anyone can just play. And the great thing there is like it's not going to be balanced, but it's more balanced than someone buying a starter deck and going against someone's green Tron deck from Modern.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and it
If people don't know, I'm referencing Nate's favorite deck right now.
yeah, exactly.
The experience I do have that was it was pretty good too, and it's not quite draft level, but you can catch these events when new sets come out, and that's the pre-release, right?
Mhm, mhm,
Where you get your packs and you just build from those packs, right? You don't have to worry about what card to grab, what card's going to get past you. You know what you have to work with, right?
mhm.
I'd say it's a step before draft
Uh-huh.
where the meta still matters, but you have what you have, right?
Yeah.
Um, because I did the pre-release for Avacyn
Uh-huh.
back when. That's the only one I ever went to, but like it still went decently well, right? Because it's the same draft chaff, like whatever. I
Mhm,
ended up building a Simic deck that relied on a flyer because almost no one had any flying, right?
mhm.
And that's kind of like, getting into the strategies too, right? Like what's trash normally
Yeah.
and what's actually good when you're playing in a very restricted format. The other thing that goes in that, and you've mentioned it before, getting into all these other costs of things, and new players coming in. How long was it before you sleeved your deck?
It's actually funny you mention this. I sleeved pretty early because I'm a big fan of protection. I did sleeve my decks fairly early in the run of it because I've always been a collector first. But it's funny you mention that because I was just and I was talking to you on the chat this past week about my dash deck. I have a deck that's
Hmm.
built all around the mechanic of dash, and I haven't touched it since after I built it just after Dragons of Tarkir. Like I built it back then and I've barely touched it since. I've maybe added a couple cards to it and I was tweaking it. I was, upgrading it and I realized that I didn't double sleeve it. So I built it at a time when I hadn't started double sleeving my cards yet. So I realized like, oh, that's interesting. So like it was kind of like a little bit of a time capsule in my collection of like when I started double sleeving, which was sometime after Dragons of Tarkir. So I just thought that was
Funny
interesting.
and probably gonna upset people here, but I don't double sleeve and I don't believe in it. So
Oh my goodness.
my
Blasphemer.
stuff doesn't go in the elements. Like I'm a lot more paranoid about like where my cards are,
Hmm.
right? So like I mostly sleeve because it's easier to shuffle, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Hmm.
And that also if it's a double face card, I don't have to worry about getting the proxy in there and all that other stuff, right?
Hmm.
But like I'm not the kind of person who plays with an open can of Mountain Dew on the table,
Yeah.
right? And like my hands are washed and cleaned in the first place, and I'm not putting my cards in the sink.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
like they go in deck boxes. Um and like I have my playmat here, right? Which is a whole nother thing too. Like, how long was it before you started using a playmat? Because like I used sleeves before I used a playmat.
Oh I use sleeves before I use a playmat. I double sleeve before I used a playmat. And then eventually really the reason I got a playmat, I probably got a playmat earlier than I would have otherwise, because where I usually would play was at my buddy Eric's house, and we would always play out on his porch on his and he has one of those metal tables with the small grating on it,
Hmm.
and after a while I just kind of got sick of my cards being, like I'd come home and I'd find little metal flakes on the back of my sleeves and I was like, all right, I'm tired of this shit. you so I went out and I bought I was actually at an
Well,
event and I bought a playmat and then I just started using that and then then now I have a drawer full of them over here.
yeah, because like even then, like for my case, and I think I was counting before the show and not counting the one Pokemon playmat I have. I have 9 of these.
Oh jeez.
But like in this case, so like even the one I'm here touching, like I had this custom printed because I like the artwork on it, right? And then
Hmm.
like a lot of the other ones are like artworks I liked or like not traditional style playmats. I have one of the Damnation artwork. I have one from the Inquisition of Kozilek,
Hmm.
alternate art that came with the Strixhaven.
Uh-huh.
Like those things, like they look awesome. That like the jeweled one I was using the other day. But the thing is like, and this is one of those things I would sleeves and playmats are things if you're going to be any serious about it at all, you want to get. And playmats have two major benefits to them. The first being that your cards aren't going on whatever's on the table, right? And unfortunately, when you roll your playmat, it's going to get on it, so you got to make sure that it's cleaned and whatever beforehand, right?
Hmm.
And I see that Emrakul playmat you tossed down there.
Oh yeah, and that's and that right there is Mark Tadin's signature. This was actually my first playmat. I bought this at a Grand Prix. For the listeners, I have an Emrakul Aeon's Torn playmat signed by Mark Tadine. It's my weirdest playmat too, because it's the only one that has it isn't, the aspect ratio on it wasn't perfect for a playmat.
Mm.
So like the left, or the right section of it has this weird black border thing, which is kind of odd, but anyway,
Which is
sorry.
great for your deck and your graveyard.
Yeah, it is. It is.
But yeah, no, so like that's something to keep in mind. And in general, you want to take a look at the cleanliness of wherever you're playing Magic,
Mm-hmm.
because hopefully the people at the game stores and whatever don't do too much on the table, but quick wipe down, clean your table.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have Cheetos or Doritos out, and don't let people spill their drinks near you. That's
Mm-hmm.
kind of just common courtesy. If you're going to have an open top drink, put it to the side.
Yep.
But the other thing to keep in mind, though, is it gives you a nice defined space,
Yeah.
right? That's huge when you're playing games on tables with people, right?
Oh
You
yeah.
don't want them going and like your enchantment up in your top left corner ends up in someone else's deck because you were too close to them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing. Like all of these things, a lot of gamers would consider necessary to the game, but in reality, they aren't.
No.
Like, for example, like we talk about sleeves. Like, in my opinion, single sleeve is the minimum. Like a single sleeve, no playmat, no double sleeve, no deck box really. Like I often talk about, especially if you're playing in a 60 card format, just Dragon Shield, just a Dragon Shield box can hold a single sleeve deck. If you're doing Commander, then buy one of those cheap Game Genic ones for $3, and that's really all I would consider necessary. Yeah, you got that on your table there. That's what I would consider necessary. Um, and
Even then, like it's one or the other, I would say, because like depending on your play environment and what's going on, you might not need sleeves. But
mm,
don't rubber band your cards, please. I've seen it. I've done it in the past. I used to do that with my Pokemon decks,
uh,
right? And my Yu-Gi-Oh back in that day. But like that's one of the worst things you can do, especially if you ever actually want to keep playing the game or have anything retain any value for when you die and your kids sell your collection.
well, yeah, and but see, that's the thing. And see, this is why I sleeved early. I double sleeve. I mostly double sleeve my decks. I use playmats. I have more robust deck boxes, really, because I want them to retain value. Like I want the value, as much
Mhm.
value, to be retained in my collection as possible. Not because I have some massive collection that's worth something, but because I enjoy having a collection that is worth something. That's part of the enjoyment I get out of the game. So I want to make sure it maintains that. But again, that's not necessary if all you want to do is just sit down and sling spells.
Well, the the thing to consider there, right, is sleeves are really good at making it to where you don't have to have mint condition everything
Mm-hmm.
as well, right? So if you're trying to play Magic on a budget
Oh yeah,
and you go
that's true too.
to like TCG or whatever, and you're buying, moderately played cards,
Mm-hmm.
some of those things have very noticeable markings on them.
Yep.
I'm looking through a deck here to see if I can find any of mine, but like, I mean, I usually don't because it's usually like a couple penny difference depending
Mm-hmm.
on the value of the card. But kind of just as a rule of thumb, like you want to make sure people can't say you're cheating by having marked cards.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So these are just good at making it consistent, at least.
Mm-hmm.
That and it's it's kind of your little bling to your deck, right?
Yeah. Well,
Unfortunately, I have decks that cost less than the sleeves did.
I love, like you mentioned, and that's actually a very interesting point to make for the barrier to entry and cost. If, anyone listening who will be near a command fest anytime soon, go to the command fest, wherever it is. It's free to get in. Don't let them, at least this year it was. Hopefully next year they keep it free. They will sell you a badge. And if you want to play in the command zone, but just stop by. And usually Star City Games will be there, or whoever's running the event will be there with their booth. Go to what I call the scratch and dent section. And it's essentially the heavily played, the moderate and heavily played, sometimes damaged cards that are typically very expensive. I was able to get a couple of Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. I was able to get a couple of old school Birds of Paradise. A ton of cards for a fraction of the cost. Yeah, it blew my mind. like how much I was able to get. So like go check out Scratch and Dent, you know, especially if you have a really big like a retailer, like if you're lucky enough to live in like the Pacific Northwest and you're close enough to go to Mox Boarding House, which is the physical locations for Card Kingdom, or if you're near Cool Stuff Inc. down in Florida, or if you're near Roanoke down here in Virginia, run over to Star City Games.
That's an interesting thing because, like, at the same point, like, I remember reading about people talking about hanging around on draft night and grab the draft chaff people don't take home.
Oh yeah.
But that's another way to get cards too if you want free cards in your collection because a lot of people there just go to play. They take the ones that are worth money and they don't care about the rest.
Oh yeah.
The other thing that's interesting, and it's on the other flip side of this, is proxies.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole process that goes into it, and people have different opinions on them, right? But I just made my own proxy deck for fun,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not good. It's not competitive at all. I don't have to worry about going to tournaments because I'm not doing that, right? As long as the people you're playing with are okay with the deck, the quality. In my case, I proxied everything, so it's gonna be consistent thickness regardless when it's sleeved, and the quality for the place I went through has been pretty good anyways. Um, so it's just one of those things to consider too.
Oh yeah.
Like if you're wanting to get into that CDH table that your buddies play and they curb stomp you every time you show up with your favorite little deck, that's just never going to get there, right? It doesn't have to be $2,000 later just to play a game.
Yep. Well, and that's the thing. Like, and I even would go so far if you've got a printer, if you still have a printer kicking around.
Yeah.
Seriously,
if those things aren't very reliable.
yeah, like admittedly, you do have to accept a little bit of a quality loss of what it looks like. But I'll tell you, what I used to do with proxies is I would take lands that I wasn't using, and I would print out the proxies to about the size of the card, and then I would just cut them out and slide them into the sleeve with the land, and it worked perfect. And I was never able to tell, and I would have proxies in with real cards, and I was never able to tell the difference of what was going to be a proxy and what was going to be a real card off the top of my deck, or I couldn't cut to any card reliably. So it worked out fine for me. So that's definitely a way that you can go about it.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And it reminds me of some of the interesting and funny proxies I've seen. Because like a lot of times you'll see people write on like a basic force or basic planes and like just Sharpie on the name of something, right?
Yeah.
As long as it's legible and you can use it in your play group and people are okay with it, that's fine. But I've seen the joke versions the other way, where it's like a $600 card that's been like proxied into a planes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But those are not actual, like those are proxies you can get printed just for the humor. And that's what I love about like a lot of these proxies is you can get artwork and things like that are not magic printed, but can fit the playstyle you're going for, right? Like I've talked to you before about this previously, but like I bought a set of like Fallout lands before the Fallout Secret Layer or whatever Universes Beyond thing they're doing got like talked about. Like I just love the style and I love the game, right? But it's interesting when you're coming back because like that's a further in. You've been playing the game a bit and you want to play more, but not necessarily use the wallet expense to get there, right?
Yeah.
And I think proxies are great for what you were talking about with like play testing, especially if it's a $20 card and it's like, does it even do what I want it to do? Let's try it before I buy it, right?
Yeah. I am a huge proponent of proxies for testing because I think it's ridiculous to expect someone to go out and buy the cards when they can just get a Sharpie and some Infinitokens. I know some people they'll buy packs of Infinitokens and then they'll just and it's just like playtest cards like they do at Wizards. Like that obviously Wizards is they go a little bit further than Sharpies on cards, but but I think that's excellent for playtesting and I think that's for like you said it's not necessarily a barrier to entry, but like it's not, I shouldn't say barrier to entry. It's not necessarily for a new player, but there definitely are new players out there who maybe they're Pokemon players and they already are kind of already in the TCG player ecosystem, like the gaming ecosystem. So for them, that's not a big leap to go there and do that. Whereas with with Magic and such, these are all great options, I think.
I think circling back, really what it comes down to when you're talking about playing Magic is, you want to have the buddy to play. You can find an LGS. People typically will want to teach you. Just find that person who's a bit more patient and willing to explain things, right?
Mhm.
And the bare minimums for when you're playing, and it's not things you need day one, right? Like you can get those jumpstart packs, you can get the starter decks, and ask a buddy to explain the game to you. Starter deck, the dual decks are great for teaching somebody because you're semi close on power level.
Yep.
And that's like always a big problem when you want to just play against a buddy and he hands you a deck that you don't know how to run, and he's going to stomp you so hard because his deck is tuned. And if you're not running it right, you're not going to win. It's just the way it is, right? But beyond that, like we talk about, sleeve cost and playmat cost, and dice. And dice are things like if you play D&D, you'll have a D20 set. You can use those. Get a thing of D6s if you need them. Just keep in mind, if you're trying to save money, don't play massive tokens or counter decks to start with, because you're going to need dice, you're going to need tokens, you're going to need all this supplementary stuff to go with it. Because one thing you don't want to do is show up to play and not have the tokens to accurately show what you're doing with your deck.
Yeah. But at the same time, and see, this is something that I do, I always make sure I have extra, so that way when I'm playing a new player and they go, oh geez, I don't have any dice, I can just say, oh, here, use mine.
Well,
that's just a tip for us veteran players out there.
The other thing too is if you're playing a deck that does things to your opponent and does tokens there, make sure you have copies of those.
Yeah, or at the very least,
like,
infinite tokens to
right
write it out.
Right. I mean, those are great for a lot of the stuff, and like especially where I'm not going to go dig through my token pile to look up one elemental that's a specific elemental, because they're not all the same, right?
Yeah,
it gives you options, right? Like, the last game we were playing, I was using the little notation things and just moving them from token to token to say, hey, this is my incubator, now this is my Phyrexian, right?
Yep.
And you don't have to worry about the die rolling or reading the die or saying, okay, well, this die means how many I have, and this die is how many +1/+1s it has.
Yeah, exactly.
We touched on a few other things here that we really do want to get into. But that's going to be a whole another episode of this barrier to entry, where we can talk about LGSs and a lot more of the politics that go into this. And then again, like maybe a bit more discussion on gear. And again, check out the videos Nate's done. There's a lot of non-Magic products that can be used for Magic, other than sleeves, to be fair. I would stick to the sleeves. And just as a rule of thumb, I've learned the hard way, make sure you buy the right size. The Japanese sleeves are too small.
Oh yeah, I almost made that mistake myself.
I have where it's you grab the box because it's like the right color and everything, and then it's like, wait a minute.
You pull it out, you're like, wait, this doesn't quite.
Right. Not a problem you think you would have, but sometimes the cards have a specific size. And don't just go based off a brand like I did, right? Just because it's Dragon Shield or whatever doesn't mean it's correct. Read the box first.
Exactly. And that about does it for today's discussion on Beyond the Deck Box, where we talk about all things Magic the Gathering. You can find us each week on the YouTube channel FDS MTG, or you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. Just look for Beyond the Deck Box. You can find DM Dingo on Twitch, or you can find him on the FDS MTG Discord, link in the description. You can find me, FDS MTG, on YouTube, or at FDS_MTG on Threads, or on Mastodon, kind.social. Thank you so much for tuning in, and you all have a wonderful day.